The Wyoming mountains in winter were no place for the living. Snow fell in thick curtains across the pine forests, and the wind howled through the valleys like a wounded animal. Ice crystals hung in the air, catching what little moonlight filtered through the storm clouds. The only sounds were the creaking of frozen branches and the distant howl of wolves tracking their prey through the white wilderness. Caleb Boone's cabin sat alone on a ridge, half buried in snowdrifts, its chimney sending up a thin line of smoke that was immediately torn away by the wind. He'd built it himself 4 years ago, choosing this isolated spot precisely because no one would find him here. The nearest town was 2 days' ride in good weather, which meant it might as well be on the moon during a storm like this. Inside, the cabin was sparse but sturdy. A single room with rough-hewn walls, a stone fireplace, a narrow bed covered in bear pelts, and a table with one chair. No photographs, no mementos, nothing that suggested a life before this place. Caleb sat by the fire, methodically cleaning his rifle, his weathered hands moving with practiced efficiency. At 35, his face bore the marks of a man who'd aged beyond his years, deep lines around gray eyes that rarely showed emotion. Dark hair shot through with premature silver, and a beard he trimmed only when it got in his way. The storm had been building for 3 days, and he'd prepared accordingly. Firewood stacked high against the wall, salted meat in the cold storage, enough coffee and flour to last a month. He preferred it this way, cut off from the world, alone with his ghosts. The knock on the door was so faint he almost missed it beneath the wind's fury. He froze, rifle half assembled in his hands. No one came up here. No one even knew this cabin existed except for old Charlie at the trading post. And Charlie knew better than to send anyone Caleb's way. The knock came again, barely audible. Then a voice, thin and desperate. "Please, let me in tonight." It was a woman's voice, which made even less sense. Caleb set down his rifle and moved to the door, his hand instinctively going to the revolver at his hip. Through the thick wooden planks, he could hear labored breathing and what sounded like sobbing. He yanked open the door, and the figure that stumbled forward nearly collapsed at his feet. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair plastered to her skull by melting snow. Her dress, once blue, he thought was torn and muddied. Clinging to her shaking frame, her lips were purple with cold, and her eyes, when she looked up at him, were the deep brown of winter earth. "Please," she gasped, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely speak. I'm your bride, the mail-order bride. You sent for me." Caleb stared down at her, his mind struggling to process her words. "Lady, you've got the wrong place." "I didn't send for anybody." She fumbled in the remains of what had once been a traveling cloak, producing a water-stained envelope. "Caleb Boone," she managed through blue lips. "The letter said, Caleb Boone, Wyoming Territory." The wind chose that moment to gust through the doorway, driving snow into the cabin and nearly knocking the woman off her feet. Whatever else she was dying of cold. Caleb made a decision that went against every instinct he'd honed in 4 years of solitude. "Get inside," he growled, pulling her through the doorway and slamming the door against the storm. She stood swaying in the middle of his cabin, dripping melted snow onto the floorboards, looking like she might collapse at any moment. Up close, he could see she'd been traveling hard. Her dress wasn't just muddy, but torn in places, and there were scratches on her hands and face, as if she'd been through brambles. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to the chair by the fire. She nearly fell into it, her whole body shaking. Caleb grabbed a blanket from his bed and wrapped it around her shoulders, then ladled water from the pot he kept warm by the hearth into a tin cup. "Drink slow," he said, holding it to her lips when her hands shook too badly to grip it. She sipped, coughed, sipped again. Color began returning to her cheeks, though she still shivered violently. "Thank you," she whispered. Caleb pulled over a wooden crate to sit across from her. "Now, you want to tell me what this is about? Because I sure as hell didn't send for any bride." She clutched the blanket tighter, seeming to shrink into herself. "My name is Evelyn Hart. I answered an advertisement in Chicago For a wife. The agency said you were a rancher here in Wyoming, that you wanted. She trailed off, fresh tears mixing with the melted snow on her face. Let me see that letter. She handed over the envelope with trembling fingers. Caleb recognized the handwriting immediately, and his jaw tightened. Jonah. His younger brother's elaborate script was unmistakable, even water-damaged. He scanned the contents, promises of a prosperous ranch, a good life in the Wyoming territory, a man looking for a fresh start with a willing bride. This wasn't from me, Caleb said flatly. It's from my brother. He doesn't live here anymore. Evelyn's face crumpled. But I came all this way. The stage driver left me at the bottom of the trail 3 days ago. Said this was the Boone place. I've been walking 3 days. Caleb stood abruptly. No wonder she looked half dead. In this weather, I got lost, she admitted in a small voice. The snow came so fast, and I couldn't see the trail. I found a cave the first night, and then I just kept walking. I thought I was going to die out there. Caleb ran a hand through his hair, cursing internally. Jonah had left 2 years ago after a fight that had nearly come to blows. Last Caleb heard, his brother was running goods between Kansas and Missouri, making money however he could. Leave it to Jonah to pull something like this, make promises he had no intention of keeping, probably for a fee from whatever agency he'd dealt with. You have anyone to go back to? He asked. Family? Anyone waiting for you? She shook her head slowly. I grew up in an orphanage. When I aged out, I worked in factories, saved every penny for this chance. They said it would be a new life. Caleb turned away, staring into the fire. He couldn't send her back out into that storm. She'd be dead within an hour. But having her here, in his space. You can stay tonight, he said finally, not looking at her. Storm should break in a day or two. Then I'll take you down to town, put you on a stage back east. I can't go back. Her voice was stronger now, with an edge of desperation. I spent everything I had to get here. There's nothing for me back there. That's not my problem. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was steady despite her chattering teeth. I know. I'm sorry. I won't be any trouble. Just let me get warm tonight. Caleb busied himself heating leftover stew, trying to ignore the way she huddled in his chair like a broken bird. He hadn't had another person in his cabin since he'd built it. The space felt smaller with her in it. The air charged with an unfamiliar energy. She ate the stew slowly, mechanically, as if she was too exhausted to taste it. Caleb added more wood to the fire, acutely aware of every movement she made, every small sound. When she finished eating, she set the bowl aside and looked at him with those dark eyes. I'm sorry, she said again, for intruding, for all of this. Stop apologizing. Won't change anything. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter. Could I sleep by the fire? I promise I'll be gone as soon as the storm breaks. Caleb fetched more blankets from the storage chest, spreading them on the floor near the hearth. It was where he sometimes slept on the coldest nights. This'll do, he said gruffly, as she settled onto the makeshift bed, still shivering despite the fire's warmth. She looked up at him. What happened to your wife? The question hit him like a physical blow. What makes you think I had a wife? The way this place feels, she said softly, like someone's missing from it. Caleb turned away. Get some sleep. But sleep wouldn't come easy for either of them. As the storm raged outside, Evelyn tossed restlessly, muttering in her sleep. Fragments of words reached Caleb where he sat in the corner, rifle across his knees out of old habit. No, please, I won't go back. Can't make me. And later, so quiet he almost missed it. Someone's following. At the station, those eyes. Caleb stared into the darkness beyond the firelight, wondering what kind of trouble had just walked through his door, and why he'd been fool enough to let it in. Dawn came slowly to the mountains, filtered through thick clouds that promised more snow. Caleb woke to find Evelyn already sitting up, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring into the dying embers of the fire. In the pale light, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, but also something else, a quiet determination that hadn't been there the night before. "How long have you been awake?" he asked, rising from his chair and stretching muscles stiff from sleeping upright. "A while," she said softly. "The wind sounds different here than in the city, like it's alive." Caleb rebuilt the fire, adding fresh logs until flames crackled to life. Outside, the storm had indeed worsened overnight. Snow pressed against the windows, and he could barely see 10 feet beyond the glass. They weren't going anywhere for days. He made coffee, strong and bitter, and set about preparing a simple breakfast of biscuits and preserved peaches. Evelyn watched him move around the small space with an efficiency born of long practice. "May I help?" she asked. "You know how to cook?" A small smile touched her lips. "I worked in kitchens sometimes, between factory shifts." He gestured to the supplies. "Make yourself useful then." She stood carefully, testing her balance, then moved to examine his stores. Her movements were still stiff, but the night's rest had restored some strength. As she worked, Caleb noticed her dress was beyond salvaging, torn in multiple places, and stained with mud and pine sap. "There's spare clothes in that trunk," he said, nodding toward the corner. They're too small for me. Might fit you better than what you're wearing." Evelyn's hands stilled on the flower she was measuring. "Your wife's. Just clothes," he said curtly. "Take them or freeze. Your choice." She found a simple brown dress and a heavy shawl. Disappearing behind the blanket he strung up for privacy. When she emerged, Caleb had to look away. The dress fit well enough, and seeing her in Mary's clothes stirred memories he'd buried deep. They ate in silence, but it wasn't entirely uncomfortable. Evelyn had made the biscuits light and fluffy, better than his usual efforts. She'd also found his small store of herbs and made a tea that tasted of mint and something else he couldn't identify. "This is good," he admitted grudgingly. "My mother taught me before she died. Evelyn said she worked in grand houses, learned from their cooks. It's one of the few things I remember about her." "How old were you when she passed?" 7. Lung fever took her one winter. The orphanage wasn't so bad. Really, they taught us skills. Sewing, cooking, letters and numbers. Said it would help us find positions when we aged out. "But you ended up in factories instead." Her face darkened. "The positions they found for us weren't what they promised. I ran away the first night, found work in a textile mill. It was honest work, even if it barely paid enough to live." Caleb studied her over his coffee cup. There was more to that story, but he didn't press. Everyone out here had secrets they'd rather keep buried. The day stretched long with nothing to do but tend the fire and watch the snow fall. Evelyn found his small collection of books, mostly almanacs and one worn Bible, and asked if she might read. He nodded, settling into his own routine of checking his traps near the cabin, empty, as expected in this weather, and reinforcing the shutters against the wind. When he came back inside, stomping snow from his boots, he found her not reading but mending one of his shirts, her needle moving in precise, practiced stitches. "That doesn't need fixing," he said. "It does," she replied without looking up. "The sleeve was coming loose. You'd have lost it entirely soon." He wanted to tell her to stop, that he didn't need or want her domestic touches in his space, but the words died in his throat. It had been so long since anyone had done something simply kind for him. As afternoon faded to evening, the storm showed no signs of breaking. If anything, it grew fiercer. Evelyn set aside her sewing and moved to look out the window, her breath fogging the glass. "I've never seen anything like this," she said. "In Chicago, snow was just something that made the work harder, the cold more bitter. But here, it's beautiful and terrible at the same time. It'll kill you just as dead whether you find it beautiful or not," Caleb said. She turned to look at him. "Is that why you live up here? Because it's terrible?" "I live up here because I choose to. Nobody chooses isolation without a reason." He set down the trap he'd been repairing, his jaw tight, Maybe you should worry less about my reasons and more about what you're going to do when this storm breaks. I told you, I can't go back. I won't." There was steel in her voice now. "I'll find work in town, or at one of the ranches. I'm not afraid of hard work. You have any idea what kind of work a woman alone can find out here? It's not factories and kitchens." Her chin lifted. "I know exactly what kind of work you mean, and I'd rather die in your storm than live that life." Something in her tone made him look at her more carefully. There were shadows under her eyes that spoke of more than just exhaustion, a wariness in how she held herself that he recognized. He'd seen it in his own reflection often enough. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked quietly. She turned back to the window. "We all have our reasons for choosing isolation, Mr. Boone." That night, she made dinner, a stew from the salted meat and dried vegetables that tasted better than anything he'd cooked in 4 years. They ate by firelight, the storm howling outside like a living thing trying to claw its way in. "Tell me about your brother," Evelyn said. "The one who wrote the letter." Caleb's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "Not much to tell. Jonah's 5 years younger. Always had bigger dreams than sense. Couldn't stand the quiet life. Always chasing the next scheme that would make him rich." "You were close once?" "Once." He took a long swallow of coffee. "We had a ranch, inherited from our father. After the fire, Jonah wanted to rebuild. Start over. I couldn't. We fought. He left. End of story." "The fire that took your wife?" The words hung in the air between them. Caleb set down his cup carefully, his hands steady despite the tremor he felt inside. "Mary. Her name was Mary. And our daughter, Sarah. She was 3. Evelyn's hand moved as if to reach for him, then stopped. "I'm sorry. It was 4 years ago. Lightning strike hit the barn, spread to the house before we could stop it. I was in town, getting supplies. By the time I got back..." He stood abruptly, moving to add wood to the fire, though it didn't need it. "Jonah blamed me for leaving them alone. He wasn't wrong. You can't hold yourself responsible for acts of nature." He laughed, short and bitter. "Can't I?" They didn't speak again that night, but Evelyn made him take the bed while she stayed by the fire. He protested, but she insisted with a firmness that surprised him, lying in his own bed, listening to her quiet breathing across the room. Caleb realized it was the first time in 4 years he hadn't been alone with his ghosts. Near midnight, she stirred restlessly, whimpering in her sleep. He heard her murmur about trains and stations, about eyes watching, about someone looking for her. When she cried out more sharply, he rose and knelt beside her, touching her shoulder gently. "Evelyn, wake up." Her eyes flew open, unfocused and terrified. For a moment she didn't seem to recognize him, shrinking away. Then clarity returned, and she covered her face with her hands. "I'm sorry. Did I wake you? Who's looking for you?" he asked quietly. She was silent so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "When I said the positions weren't what they promised, there was a man, Mr. Aldrich. He ran a boarding house for working girls, or so he claimed, but once you owed him for rent, for food, for clothes he said you needed, you could never pay it back. And then he'd tell you there were other ways to settle the debt." Caleb's hands clenched into fists. "Did he?" "No. I left before. I took what money I'd hidden and ran. But he has people watching the train stations, the stage lines. He doesn't like losing his investments." She looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I thought if I could get far enough away, become someone's wife, have a new name, a new life." "So you answered the advertisement. It seemed like providence, a chance to disappear completely." She laughed shakily. "I should have known it was too good to be true." Caleb sat back on his heels. Processing this information, it changed things, though he wasn't sure how yet. All he knew was that the scared, desperate woman in front of him was running from something worse than a blizzard. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "Storm's not breaking anytime soon. We'll figure out the rest later." She caught his hand as he started to rise. Thank you for listening, for not throwing me back into the snow." He extracted his hand gently. "Don't thank me yet. I still don't have any answers for you." But as he lay in bed, listening to the wind and her quiet breathing, Caleb found himself thinking not of ways to send her away, but of what kind of man would hunt a woman across half the country for the crime of refusing to be sold, and what that man might do if he found her. The storm lasted 6 days. 6 days of white silence broken only by wind and the crack of ice-heavy branches. 6 days of two strangers learning to share a space meant for solitude. Evelyn had transformed the cabin without seeming to try. It wasn't just the mending, though every torn shirt now bore neat stitches. Every loose button was secured. It was the small touches. Wildflowers she'd dried last summer arranged in an empty tin. The rough tables scrubbed clean. The windows cleared of their film of smoke and neglect. The cabin felt alive in a way it hadn't since Mary. Caleb found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. The way she hummed softly while working. How her fingers moved with practiced grace over whatever task occupied them. The determined set of her jaw when tackling something difficult. She'd taken to wearing Mary's clothes as if they'd always been hers. And sometimes in the firelight, Caleb's heart would skip before reality crashed back. On the 4th day, she found his rifle in pieces on the table. "Teach me," she said simply. "What?" "To shoot, to clean and care for a weapon. If I'm to make my way out here, I should know how to defend myself." He wanted to refuse, but something in her eyes, that mix of fear and determination, made him nod. He showed her how to break down the rifle, clean each piece, oil the mechanisms. Her hands were steady, her concentration absolute. "You've handled guns before," he observed. "Mr. Aldrich kept pistols," she said quietly. "I watched, learned, just in case." On the 5th day, the wind finally began to quiet. They ventured outside together to dig paths through the snow and check his trap lines. Evelyn had borrowed a pair of his trousers, cinched tight with rope, and one of his heavy coats. She looked like a child playing dress-up, but she worked without complaint, her breath clouding in the frigid air. That evening, a wolf appeared at the edge of the clearing, a big male, silver-gray in the twilight, watching them with intelligent yellow eyes. Evelyn froze, but Caleb simply stood still, rifle loose in his hands. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He's deciding if we're worth the trouble," Caleb corrected. "Pack's probably hungry after the storm." The wolf studied them for another long moment, then melted back into the trees. Evelyn's eyes were bright with wonder. "I've never seen anything so wild and free," she said. "Freedom's got teeth out here," Caleb reminded her. "Don't forget that." That night, as they sat by the fire, she worked on something he couldn't see, her needle flashing in the light. He'd grown comfortable with these quiet evenings, the companionable silence broken only by the pop of burning wood and the settling of the cabin. "I had a daughter," she said suddenly. Caleb's head snapped up. She wasn't looking at him, focused on her sewing. "Had? She died at birth. The father was... It doesn't matter who he was. The orphanage arranged everything, said it was for the best. I never even held her." Her voice was steady, but tears tracked down her cheeks. "That was 3 years ago. Sometimes I still dream about her." He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing, but he moved to sit beside her on the floor, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Is that why you run?" he asked finally. "The dreams?" "Partly. But mostly I run because I refuse to be what they wanted to make me. I won't be owned, Mr. Boone, not by anyone." "Caleb," he said roughly. "My name is Caleb." She smiled through her tears. "Caleb." On the 6th morning, they woke to clear skies. The storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a world transformed into pristine white sculpture. The temperature had dropped even further, but the sun was blinding on the snow. "It's over," Evelyn said, standing at the window. She didn't sound happy about it. Caleb joined her, seeing their isolation with new eyes. Soon the trails would be passable. Soon he'd have to make good on his promise to take her to town. Soon she'd be gone. Another day or two before we can travel safely, he said. She nodded, turning away. I'll start preparing, gathering my things. Evelyn, I understand, she said quickly. You've been more than kind. I won't impose any longer than necessary. But that evening, she gave him what she'd been working on, a small square of leather, carefully tooled with a pattern of mountains and stars. It was designed to wrap around the stock of his rifle, protecting his hand from the cold metal. It's not much, she said shyly, but I wanted to leave something besides the mending. Caleb turned it over in his hands, throat tight. It was beautiful work, delicate yet practical. Where did you learn this? One of the other girls at the orphanage. Her father had been a leather worker before he died. She taught me a little. She hesitated. I hope it's all right. I used some scraps I found in your storage. It's... He had to stop, clear his throat. It's fine work. Thank you. That night, Caleb told her about the fire. Really told her. Not the brief facts he'd shared before. How he'd smelled the smoke from 5 miles out and spurred his horse until it nearly dropped. How he'd found the ranch hands trying desperately to contain the blaze. How he'd run into the inferno anyway, searching, calling their names until the smoke drove him back. How they'd found Mary and Sarah together in Sarah's room, overcome by smoke before the flames reached them. She was trying to get Sarah out, he said, staring into the fire. The window was stuck. I'd meant to fix it for months. If I'd just fixed that damned window. Don't, Evelyn said softly. That way lies madness. I know. Doesn't stop the thoughts, though. No, she agreed. It doesn't. She moved closer, not touching but near enough that he could feel her warmth. Is that why you stay up here? Punishment? He considered the question. Started that way. Now, I don't know. It's just where I am. You're not a tomb, Caleb, she said, echoing her words from days ago. You're still breathing. He turned to look at her then. Really look at her. The firelight caught the gold in her brown eyes, highlighted the determined line of her jaw. She was beautiful, he realized with a jolt. Not in Mary's delicate way, but with a fierce beauty born of survival and strength. Why are you looking at me like that? She asked softly. I don't know. He admitted. The space between them seemed to shrink without either moving. Her lips parted slightly, and he found himself leaning closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. Her eyes fluttered closed. The crack of settling wood in the fire broke the spell. Caleb jerked back, standing abruptly. I need to check the horses, he muttered, grabbing his coat. Caleb? But he was already out the door, into the bitter night. The cold hit him like a slap, clearing his head. What was he doing? She was leaving in 2 days. She was running from her own demons. She was not Mary and could never be Mary. He stayed in the barn longer than necessary, tending horses that didn't need tending. When he finally returned, Evelyn was already in her makeshift bed by the fire, turned away from him. But he could tell by her breathing that she wasn't asleep. I'm sorry, he said to the darkness. For what? Her voice was carefully neutral. For making things complicated. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, things were already complicated. Caleb, you just made them human. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing that something had shifted between them. In 2 days, he would take her to town. She would board a stage to somewhere else, become someone else, live a life that had nothing to do with a broken man in a mountain cabin. It was for the best, he told himself. He had chosen his isolation for good reasons. He had nothing to offer but a tomb of memories and a heart that had forgotten how to beat properly. But when he heard her crying quietly in the dark, he had to grip the bed frame to keep from going to her. And he knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that taking her to town would be the hardest thing he'd done since burying his family. In the morning, he told himself, in the morning, they would prepare for the journey. In the morning, they would return to being strangers. But morning was still hours away, and in the darkness, with her quiet tears and his loud regrets, they were just 2 broken people trying to survive the night. The riders appeared just after dawn, dark shapes against the white landscape. Caleb spotted them from the window where he'd been drinking coffee, watching the sun paint the mountains gold. 3 men, moving with the purposeful pace of those who knew exactly where they were going. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "get in the back room, now." She looked up from the breakfast she was preparing, saw his face, and moved without question. He heard the soft click of the door closing behind her. By the time the riders reached the cabin, Caleb was standing on the porch, rifle casual in his hands but ready. He recognized the type immediately. Hard men with cold eyes and hands that hovered near their guns. Bounty hunters, most likely, though they could just as easily be hired thugs. The leader, a lean man with a scar running through his left eyebrow, touched his hat brim. "Morning, friend. Name's Jake Morrison. These are my associates, Mr. Dalton and Mr. Cruz." "State your business," Caleb said flatly. Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Looking for someone. A woman. Dark hair. About 25. Pretty in a common sort of way. Goes by Evelyn Hart, though she might be using another name. Haven't seen any women up here. Storms kept everyone inside for days." "Funny thing," Morrison said, dismounting slowly. "Stage driver down at Miller's Creek remembers dropping a woman off at the trailhead about a week back. Said she was asking after the Boone place." Dalton, a thick-set man with small, mean eyes, had circled around to get a better angle on the cabin. Cruz stayed mounted, hand resting on his pistol. "Lots of Boones in these mountains," Caleb said. "True enough. But you're the only one with a brother who's been advertising for mail-order brides." Morrison pulled out a familiar-looking letter. "See, we tracked her from Chicago to Kansas City. Then here, Mr. Aldrich, her employer, is quite anxious to have her back. She stole from him. You understand, took money and valuables when she ran. If she stole from him, why isn't the law looking for her?" Morrison's smile widened. "Mr. Aldrich prefers to handle these matters privately. More efficient that way." "Well, she's not here. Try the other Boones. Mind if we look around? Just to satisfy Mr. Aldrich that we've been thorough?" "I mind," Caleb said, shifting his rifle slightly. "This is private property." The tension stretched taut between them. Dalton's hand inched toward his gun. Cruz leaned forward in his saddle. Morrison just kept smiling that cold smile. "Now, friend, no need for unpleasantness. We're reasonable men. If you happen to find this woman after we leave, there's a reward. $500 for information leading to her return. Like I said, haven't seen her." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. But let me share something. Farmer to farmer. This woman, she's dangerous. Attacked Mr. Aldrich when he tried to discuss her debts. Nearly killed him with a letter opener. A man harboring a violent criminal could find himself in considerable trouble. I'll keep that in mind. You do that." Morrison mounted his horse with practiced ease. "We'll be in the area for a while, staying down at Miller's Creek, if you remember anything at all. You come find us." They rode away slowly, Dalton throwing looks back at the cabin. Caleb waited until they were out of sight before going inside, barring the door behind him. Evelyn emerged from the back room, her face pale but composed. "They're gone. For now." She sank into a chair, hands trembling slightly. "I didn't steal from him, and the letter opener—" "He cornered me in his office. Said I could work off my debts in his private rooms. I grabbed the first thing I could find. Did you hurt him?" "Not enough to stop him coming after me, apparently." She looked up at him with those dark eyes. "You should have given me to them. $500 is a lot of money." "Blood money," Caleb said curtly. "And we both know they wouldn't have taken you back to Chicago. Not alive, anyway." She wrapped her arms around herself. "They'll be back." "Probably. I should leave. Tonight. Lead them away from here. You wouldn't make it a mile in this snow before they caught you." He moved to the window, scanning the tree line. "No, we need to be smarter than that." "We?" She stood, crossing to him. "Caleb, this isn't your fight. You've done more than enough. It became my fight the minute they rode onto my land making threats." He turned to face her. "Besides, you think I could live with myself, sending you out to those wolves?" Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door. Maybe, or maybe you've reminded me that some things are worth fighting for." They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Caleb cleaned and loaded every weapon he owned, positioned ammunition where it could be easily reached. Evelyn helped, her movements calm and efficient despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "You've done this before," she observed. "Prepared for a siege. Once or twice, during the range wars, before I met Mary. A lot of men thought they could take what wasn't theirs back then. What happened to them?" His smile was grim. "They learned different." As afternoon wore on with no sign of the hunters returning, they risked venturing outside to tend the animals. Evelyn had become comfortable with the horses, and they responded to her gentle touch. She was brushing the mare when she asked, "What will you do if I stay?" He paused in his work. "What do you mean? If they don't find me, if I just stayed, would you want that?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Caleb forced himself to continue checking the horse's hooves. "That's not a decision to make with guns pointed at your head." "Maybe it's the only time to make it," she countered. "When everything is clear and simple, when you know what really matters." He straightened, looking at her across the horse's back. "And what matters to you, Evelyn?" "Not being alone anymore," she said simply. "Not running. Having something worth staying for." "I'm not worth staying for. I'm a broken man living in a tomb of his own making." She came around the horse to stand before him. "You're a man who took in a stranger when he could have turned her away, who's willing to face down killers rather than hand over an innocent woman. You think you're broken, but I see the pieces still fighting to hold together." "Evelyn," she placed her hand on his chest, over his heart. "It's still beating. Caleb, I can feel it." This time, when the space between them disappeared, he didn't pull away. Her lips were soft and tasted of the mint tea she favored. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant. Two damaged people testing if they could still feel something beyond pain. When they parted, her cheeks were flushed and his hands were shaking. "This is a bad idea," he said roughly. "Probably." She agreed. "But I'm tired of good ideas that leave me empty." They finished with the horses in silence, but it was charged with new awareness. Every accidental touch, every shared glance carried weight now. Back in the cabin, they moved around each other carefully, as if they were made of glass. As night fell, Caleb positioned himself by the window with his rifle. "Get some sleep. I'll keep watch." "You can't stay awake forever." "Don't need forever, just tonight." But she didn't go to her makeshift bed. Instead, she sat beside him, her presence warm and steady. "Tell me about after," she said. "After the fire. Where did you go?" He was quiet for a long time. "Nowhere, everywhere. I drifted for months, taking work where I could find it. Ranch hand, miner, whatever paid enough for whiskey to help me sleep. Jonah found me in a saloon in Cheyenne, half dead from drink and not caring. He dragged me out, sobered me up, brought me here. He saved you. He tried, but I wasn't ready to be saved. We fought constantly. Him wanting me to rejoin the living, me wanting to be left alone to die in peace. The last fight." He shook his head. "I said things, cruel things. Blamed him for not being there that night, for still being alive when they weren't. He left the next morning. Do you know where he is now?" "Last I heard, Kansas City, running goods, probably skirting the law. He always did like walking the edge." She leaned against his shoulder, a comfortable weight. "Maybe when this is over, you could write to him, try to mend things." "Maybe," he said, though they both knew he wouldn't. The night passed slowly. Once, they heard horses in the distance, but they moved on without approaching. Evelyn dozed fitfully against him, starting awake at every sound. He kept his vigil, rifle across his knees, watching the moonlit snow for any sign of movement. Just before dawn, she stirred and looked up at him. "Whatever happens today, I want you to know something. This week with you, it's the first time I've felt safe in 3 years. The first time I've felt like a person instead of prey." He touched her face gently, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Whatever happens, I won't let them take you. That's a promise." She caught his hand, pressed it to her cheek. "Don't make promises that might get you killed." "Too late," he said, and meant it. The sun was just cresting the mountains when they heard the horses approaching again. More this time. Maybe 6 or 7 riders. Caleb's jaw tightened. Morrison had brought reinforcements. "Back room," he ordered. "Take the spare rifle. If things go bad, I'm not hiding while you face them alone." "Evelyn, no." Her voice was steel. "We stand together or not at all." He wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. The riders were spreading out, surrounding the cabin. This wouldn't be a conversation on the porch. This would be something else entirely. "All right," he said quietly. "Together." Then, he handed her the loaded rifle, showed her the window with the best angle. Their hands touched as she took the weapon, and for just a moment, their fingers intertwined. "Together," she repeated, and took her position. Outside. Morrison's voice rang out in the cold morning air. "Boone, we know she's in there. Found her tracks leading to your barn. No point denying it now. Send her out, and we ride away. Nobody has to die today." Caleb checked his ammunition one last time, then called back. "Only way she leaves is over my dead body." "That can be arranged," Morrison replied. And the morning exploded into gunfire. The first volley of bullets shattered the front windows, showering them with glass. Caleb yanked Evelyn down as lead whined overhead, splintering the wooden walls. She pressed against the floor, rifle clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Stay low," he commanded, crawling to the window. He risked a quick look, counting muzzle flashes. 7 men, spread in a rough semicircle. Morrison had positioned them well, no clear shots without exposing himself. Evelyn fired from her position, the rifle's kick nearly knocking her backward. A man cried out, clutching his shoulder. "Good shot," Caleb muttered, returning fire. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the cabin. Morrison's voice came again, mocking now. "This doesn't have to end badly, Boone. The woman's not worth dying for." Caleb's answer was another shot that sent Morrison diving behind a woodpile. The battle settled into a deadly rhythm exchanges of fire, brief lulls to reload. More shots. The cabin walls, built thick against winter storms, stopped most of the bullets, but they couldn't hold out forever. "They're trying to flank us," Evelyn called out, spotting movement to the left. Caleb shifted position, catching one of Morrison's men trying to reach the side window. His shot was true. The man dropped into the snow and didn't move again. 6 left. A bullet caught Caleb in the upper arm, spinning him around. He grunted, pressing his hand to the wound. Blood seeped between his fingers. "Caleb!" Evelyn started toward him. "Stay at your post," he growled, tearing a strip from his shirt to bind the wound. It's not deep, but she was already beside him, her hands sure as she tied off the makeshift bandage. "You're a terrible liar," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Been told that before." He reloaded one-handed, gritting his teeth against the pain. "How's your ammunition?" "Running low." He passed her his ammunition pouch. Their eyes met for a moment, saying everything they couldn't put into words. The shooting intensified. Morrison's men were getting bolder, creeping closer using the outbuildings as cover. One made it to the porch before Evelyn's shot drove him back, wounded but not down. "Boone," Morrison called. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. How many more bullets you got in there? How much blood you willing to spill for a woman you met a week ago?" "All of it," Caleb shouted back, and meant it. A torch arced through the air, landing on the roof. Then another. The smell of smoke began to filter through the rafters. "Fire!" Evelyn breathed, her face going pale. The same word, the same fear that haunted Caleb's nightmares. "Not again," he said grimly. "Not this time." He grabbed a water bucket, dousing the flames that were trying to catch on the inside walls. But more torches were coming, and they couldn't fight both fire and gunmen. "We have to get out," Evelyn said. "That's what they want. Drive us into the open. Then we give them what they want, on our terms." She was already moving, gathering ammunition, checking weapons. "The root cellar. It connects to the barn, doesn't it?" He stared at her, understanding dawning. Mary had insisted on that connection, worried about being trapped by winter storms. He'd sealed it after the fire, unable to bear the reminder of her practical wisdom. But the passage should still be clear. "Go," he said. "I'll hold them here. Give you time to—" "We go together or not at all," she interrupted fiercely. "You promised." The smoke was thickening. Outside, Morrison's men were getting cocky, moving closer. Sure, their prey was trapped. Caleb made a decision that went against every instinct of facing danger head-on. "All right, together." They made their way to the root cellar as flames began to lick at the roof beams. The trapdoor was heavy, swollen with disuse, but they managed to wrench it open. The passage below was dark and musty, barely wide enough for one person. "You first," Caleb insisted. Evelyn didn't argue. Dropping into the darkness, he followed, pulling the door shut above them just as part of the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. The tunnel was a nightmare of cobwebs and dripping water, but it was clear. They crawled through absolute darkness, guided by touch and desperate hope. Behind them, they could hear muffled shouts as Morrison's men realized the cabin was empty. They emerged in the barn to find the horses wild-eyed with fear, smelling smoke. Caleb quickly saddled his strongest mount while Evelyn gathered what supplies she could find. "They'll see us the moment we ride out," she said. "Not if they're looking the wrong way." He led the horse to the back entrance, peering out. Most of Morrison's men were focused on the burning cabin, but Cruz was watching the barn. "Can you ride?" Caleb asked. "Well enough. Then get ready." He slipped out the back, circling wide through the trees. Cruz never saw him coming. The butt of Caleb's rifle caught him behind the ear, dropping him silently into the snow. One less gun to worry about. By the time he made it back, Evelyn had the horse ready at the door. They could hear Morrison shouting orders, organizing a search. Time was running out. "Up," Caleb said, boosting her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. His wounded arm screamed protest, but he ignored it. Taking the reins, they burst from the barn at full gallop, snow flying from the horses' hooves. Shouts erupted behind them, followed immediately by gunfire. Caleb bent low over Evelyn, shielding her with his body as bullets whined past. The horse was strong and sure-footed, bred for mountain travel. They plunged into the tree line as Morrison's men scrambled for their own mounts. The forest was their ally now, too thick for easy pursuit, full of paths only Caleb knew. But they couldn't run forever. The horse was carrying double weight, and Caleb's arm was still bleeding. They needed somewhere defensive, somewhere Morrison wouldn't expect. "Where are we going?" Evelyn called over the wind. "The old mine," he replied. "Abandoned silver claim. Jonah and I used to play there as boys." It was 5 miles through difficult terrain, but the horse was game and Morrison's men were city hunters, not mountain trackers. By the time they reached the mine entrance, they'd gained precious distance. The mine shaft angled into the mountainside, timber shored and relatively stable. Caleb led the horse inside, far enough to be hidden from view. Then he collapsed against the wall, finally feeling the toll of blood loss and exhaustion. "Caleb!" Evelyn was beside him instantly, checking his wound. The bandage was soaked through. "Just need a minute," he said through gritted teeth. "You need more than that." She tore more strips from her petticoat, rebinding the wound with practiced efficiency. "This needs proper doctoring." "Later. Morrison won't give up easy. He'll track us. Then we make sure he regrets it." There was steel in her voice now, the survivor showing through. "How defendable is this place?" "One way in. Unless they want to climb down from above, we can hold them off for a while. Long enough? He met her eyes honestly. I don't know. She finished with the bandage, then surprised him by pressing her lips to his forehead. Then we make it enough. They spent the next hour preparing. The mine had old tools, timber, even some blasting powder left from its working days. Evelyn proved surprisingly knowledgeable about explosives. Another girl at the orphanage, she explained at his look. Her father was a miner. She used to tell stories. They rigged the powder near the entrance, not enough to bring down the mountain, but sufficient to discourage pursuit. Then they settled in to wait, sharing water and what little food Evelyn had grabbed. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for bringing this to you, for costing you your home. It stopped being a home the day Mary died, he replied. Just been a place to hide. Maybe it's time I stopped hiding. What will you do after this is over? He was quiet for a moment. Then, depends on whether we live through it and on what you decide to do. She leaned against his good shoulder. I know what I want. I've known since that first night, but wanting and having are different things. What do you want, Evelyn? A life. A real life. Not just survival. Someone to face the storms with. She paused. You. Before he could respond, they heard horses approaching, multiple riders, moving carefully. Morrison had found them. Boone. The now familiar voice echoed off the rocks. Running's over. You've got nowhere left to go. Caleb checked his rifle, his movement steady despite the pain. Get ready with that powder. Wait for my signal. Caleb. He caught her hand, squeezed it. Whatever happens, I'm glad you knocked on my door that night. Don't, she said fiercely. Don't you dare say goodbye. Morrison's voice came again, closer now. Last chance. Boone, send her out, and you can walk away. This isn't your fight. Caleb's answer rang out clear and strong. It's been my fight since the moment I let her in, and I don't walk away from what's mine. There was silence for a moment. Then Morrison laughed, cold and harsh. So be it, boys. Burn them out. But this time, Caleb was ready for the fire. As the first torch flew toward the mine entrance, he gave the signal. Evelyn lit the fuse, and they retreated deeper into the shaft. The explosion shook the mountain, bringing down rocks and timber across the entrance. Men screamed. Horses whinnied in terror. When the dust settled, the mine entrance was partially blocked, but not sealed. Through the gaps in the debris, they could see Morrison's men regrouping. Several were down, wounded by flying rocks. Morrison himself stood untouched, his scarred face twisted with rage. Clever, he called, but you've just trapped yourselves. We'll wait. You'll run out of water, food, ammunition, and then we'll drag her out over your corpse. Caleb and Evelyn retreated deeper into the mine, beyond the reach of bullets. In the darkness, lit only by filtered daylight, they clung to each other. He's right, Evelyn whispered. We're trapped. Maybe, but we're together. She lifted her face to his, and he could see tears on her cheeks. I don't want you to die for me. Then we'll have to find a way to live. Aw. Outside, Morrison's men settled in for a siege. Inside, two people who'd found each other in the midst of loss held tight and prepared for whatever came next. The mine was cold and dark, but in each other's arms, they found warmth. And in that warmth, against all odds, hope. The mine shaft stretched deeper than Caleb remembered from his boyhood explorations. Their horse stood patiently in the wider chamber near the entrance while they explored by touch and what little light filtered through the rubble. The air grew colder as they moved away from the entrance, but it was also fresher, suggesting another opening somewhere. There, Evelyn whispered, pointing to a faint glow ahead. Light. They followed it to find a narrow crack in the rock face, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Cold air flowed from it, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Caleb tried to peer through but could see only darkness beyond. It might lead out, he said, or it might lead nowhere. Better than waiting here to die. She was already examining the opening, testing its width. I can fit, you might be tight. His broad shoulders would be a problem, especially with his wounded arm. You should go. Get to town. Find the sheriff. Stop. She turned to face him in the dim light. How many times must I say it? Together or not at all? Outside, they could hear Morrison's men making camp, settling in for a long wait. Occasionally, someone would fire a shot into the mine, the bullet ricocheting off stone with an angry whine. Caleb's arm throbbed, and he could feel fever beginning to build. The wound needed cleaning, proper bandaging, maybe stitching, but their supplies were limited to what Evelyn had grabbed: some rope, matches, a knife, and precious little water. Let me look at that arm again, she said, guiding him to sit on a relatively flat rock. As she worked, he studied her face in the pale light. Concentration creased her brow, and she bit her lower lip as she cleaned the wound with strips torn from her petticoat and their remaining water. You've done this before too, he observed. The orphanage took in soldiers sometimes, men with nowhere else to go after the war. We girls helped tend them. She tied off the fresh bandage. That's the best I can do without proper supplies. It's enough. He caught her hand before she could pull away. Evelyn, if I don't make it, you'll make it. Her voice was fierce. Because I won't lose someone else I love. Not again. The word hung between them, unexpected and powerful. Love. Neither had dared name it before. You barely know me, he said quietly. I know enough. She cupped his face in her hands. I know you're honorable and brave. I know you've suffered loss that would break most men, but you're still standing. I know you make me feel safe in a world that's shown me very little safety. I know when you look at me, you see me, not what I've done or where I've been, but who I am. Isn't that enough? He pulled her close, ignoring the pain in his arm. More than enough, he murmured against her hair. They held each other in the cold darkness, drawing strength from shared warmth. Outside, Morrison's patience was wearing thin. They could hear him berating his men, demanding solutions. We could try negotiating, Evelyn suggested. If I gave myself up? No. Caleb's voice was flat, final. We've seen what kind of men they are. You wouldn't make it back to Chicago alive, and we both know it. She was quiet for a moment. Then we try the passage. They prepared carefully. The rope would help them stay together in the darkness. Evelyn would go first, being smaller, with Caleb following. They'd have to leave the horse. The passage was far too narrow, but if it led to freedom, they could survive on foot. Ready? He asked. She kissed him instead of answering, a kiss that tasted of desperation and determination in equal measure. Ready? The passage was worse than they'd imagined. In places, Evelyn had to turn sideways and squeeze through, rocks scraping her skin even through her clothes. Behind her, she could hear Caleb struggling, his broader frame and wounded arm making every foot a battle. The darkness was absolute, pressing against them like a living thing. Only the rope between them and the occasional touch of hands kept panic at bay. Time lost meaning. They could have been crawling for minutes or hours. Then Evelyn's reaching hand found nothing but air. She nearly fell forward into a larger space, catching herself at the last second. There's a chamber, she called back softly. Big one. They emerged into a natural cave, formed by water over countless years. Faint light filtered from somewhere above, revealing fantastic formations of stone that looked like frozen waterfalls. More importantly, they could hear the sound of running water. An underground stream, Caleb said, wonder in his voice. Jonah and I never found this. They followed the water sound to find a small flow emerging from one wall and disappearing into a crack at the far end. The water was icy but clean. They drank deeply, refilled their canteen, and Evelyn cleaned Caleb's wound properly. The water has to go somewhere, she reasoned. If we follow it, a sound echoed through the cave voices, distant but clear. Morrison's men had found the passage. Move, Caleb urged, pushing her toward the water's exit point. This crack was even narrower than the first, and partially filled with water. They'd have to crawl through the stream itself. not knowing how far it went or if the passage stayed large enough for breathing. "Caleb, what if? Then we face it together." He squeezed her hand. "But I'd rather drown free than hang at Morrison's pleasure." They entered the water tunnel, gasping at the cold that immediately soaked through their clothes. The ceiling was barely inches above the water in places, forcing them to turn their heads sideways to breathe. Behind them, shouts grew closer. The tunnel seemed endless. Caleb's arm was going numb. Whether from cold or blood loss, he couldn't tell. Evelyn pulled him forward when he faltered, her smaller frame handling the frigid water better. Then, suddenly, they were falling. The tunnel opened into a waterfall, dropping them 6 feet into a pool below. They surfaced sputtering, clinging to each other in the shockingly cold water. But they were outside. Stars gleamed overhead, and the pool fed into a stream that Caleb recognized. They were nearly 2 miles from the mine, on the opposite side of the ridge. They dragged themselves onto the bank, shaking violently from cold. Hypothermia was a real danger now, their wet clothes stealing body heat in the winter air. "Fire," Evelyn stammered through chattering teeth. "Need fire." But they had no dry wood, no shelter. Caleb pulled her against him, trying to share what little warmth they had left. His vision was starting to blur, exhaustion and blood loss finally taking their toll. "Stay awake," Evelyn pleaded, shaking him. "Caleb, please." Through the fog descending over his mind, he heard something impossible. Horses, not behind them, but ahead. His hand fumbled for his gun, but his fingers were too numb to grip it. A figure emerged from the darkness, leading 2 horses, an elderly woman in a heavy coat, her face weathered but kind. Caleb recognized her through his delirium missus, Catherine Winters, the widow who lived alone on the eastern slope. "Lord have mercy," she exclaimed, rushing to them. "You're the Boone boy, aren't you? And you, miss, you're half frozen. Come on, both of you. My place isn't far." She was surprisingly strong for her age, helping them both onto the horses. Caleb swayed in the saddle, only Evelyn's grip keeping him upright. The ride was a blur of cold and pain, and Evelyn's voice constantly calling his name, Mrs. Winter's cabin materialized like a miracle, warm, dry, safe. She bustled them inside, stoking her fire to a blaze, bringing blankets and hot water. "Get those wet things off," she ordered. "Both of you, modesty won't save you from freezing to death." She helped them out of their sodden clothes with practical efficiency, wrapping them in warm blankets, forcing hot tea between their lips. When she saw Caleb's arm, she tisked disapprovingly. "Men and their foolish fights. Hold still. This is going to hurt." It did hurt, but her hands were skilled. She cleaned the wound with something that burned like fire, then stitched it neatly closed. Through it all, Evelyn held his other hand, anchoring him to consciousness. "There, Mrs." Winters said finally. "You'll live, though you'll have a scar to remember this foolishness by. Now, you want to tell me why you were swimming in mountain streams in the middle of winter?" Evelyn glanced at Caleb, uncertain how much to reveal, but he was too tired for lies. "Bounty hunters," he said. "After her. We had to run." "Mrs." Winter's expression hardened. "That Morrison fellow? He was by here yesterday, asking questions. I told him I hadn't seen anything, and I don't plan to change that story." "You know him?" Evelyn asked. "Know of him. He's been sniffing around for days. Him and his pack of wolves, asking after a young woman, making threats." She looked at Evelyn appraisingly. "You don't look like the dangerous criminal he described." "I'm not, Evelyn stopped, then lifted her chin. "I ran from a bad situation. He wants to take me back to it." "I figured as much. Morrison doesn't hunt innocent folk." "Mrs." Winters poured more tea. "You can stay here tonight, in the morning. We'll figure out what to do." "We can't put you in danger," Caleb protested. "Son, I buried my husband and 2 boys. Lived alone on this mountain for 10 years, fighting off claim jumpers and worse. You think I'm scared of some city bounty hunter?" She snorted. "Besides, It's been a long time since I had company. Gets lonely, just talking to the horses. As warmth returned to their bodies, exhaustion took its place. Mrs. Winters made them a pallet by the fire, insisting they stay close to maintain body heat. As they settled in, Evelyn whispered, "We made it. Together." He agreed, pulling her close. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering their tracks, hiding their path. Inside, wrapped in warmth and unexpected kindness, they slept. But even in sleep, Caleb kept one hand on his gun. Morrison was still out there. And come morning, they'd have to face whatever came next. For now, though, they were alive. They were together. And sometimes, that's all the victory you need. Morning brought news with the snow. Mrs. Winters had been to town at first light, returning with supplies and information. Morrison and his remaining men were camped at Miller's Creek, nursing wounds and wounded pride. They'd put out word of a reward, $1,000 now for information about Evelyn's whereabouts. The whole town's talking. Mrs. Winters reported, unpacking her saddlebags. Sheriff Thompson's asking questions about why bounty hunters are shooting up the mountain. Morrison's claiming legal authority, but folks are getting nervous. Caleb flexed his wounded arm, testing its strength. The fever had broken in the night, and Mrs. Winters' stitching held firm. What's the sheriff doing about it? Not much he can do. Morrison's got papers that look official enough, but Thompson's a good man. He doesn't like outsiders bringing trouble to his town. She paused, giving them a meaningful look. He also mentioned he'd sure like to hear the other side of the story. Evelyn sat quietly by the window, watching the snow fall. She'd been withdrawn all morning, despite their survival the night before. Caleb knew that look. She was making a decision. "I should turn myself in," she said finally. "End this before anyone else gets hurt." "No." Caleb's response was immediate. "He's right," Mrs. Winters added. "You turn yourself into Morrison. You'll never make it to any legitimate authority. Man like that doesn't leave witnesses." "Then what?" Evelyn turned from the window, frustration clear in her voice. "We can't run forever, and I won't have more blood on my hands. Seems to me," Mrs. Winters said thoughtfully, "what you need is to get your story told to the right people. Sheriff Thompson, Judge Carter in the county seat. Make it official before Morrison can silence you." Caleb stood, pacing the small cabin. Thompson's good, but he's one man. Morrison has at least 5 guns left. They'd never make it to the jail. Unless they weren't expecting it. Mrs. Winters mused. "Morrison thinks you're trapped in that mine or frozen in the mountains. He won't expect you to walk right into town. It's too dangerous," Caleb said. "Everything's dangerous now," Evelyn countered. She moved to him, taking his hands. "But she's right. We need the law on our side, or we'll be running forever." They spent the morning planning. Mrs. Winters would go back to town, spread word that she'd seen smoke from the old mine, keeping Morrison's attention focused there. Meanwhile, Caleb and Evelyn would take the back trails into town, arriving at the sheriff's office before Morrison knew they were there. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Winters said, producing a folded paper from her pocket. "Pick this up at the telegraph office, addressed to Caleb Boone, from Kansas City." Caleb recognized Jonah's handwriting immediately. His brother's message was brief. "Heard about the trouble. Morrison's wanted in Kansas for murder. Papers are forgeries. Real law coming. Hold on. Jonah." Evelyn breathed. "He's helping?" "Seems so." Caleb folded the telegram carefully. "But real law could be days away. We can't wait." They prepared to leave as afternoon approached. Mrs. Winters insisted on giving Evelyn a proper coat and Caleb a rifle to replace the one lost in their flight. As they stood at her door, she pulled Evelyn aside. "I was young once," she said quietly. "Made choices others didn't understand. Ran from things. Ran to things. You want some advice?" Evelyn nodded. "That man there, he's looking at you like my William used to look at me. Like you're his whole world condensed into one person. That kind of love doesn't come often. Don't let fear or pride or what's proper keep you from grabbing it with both hands. She pressed something into Evelyn's hand, a simple gold ring. Was mine. William made it from the first gold he panned. It's not much, but it's honest, like what you two have. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I can't. You can and you will. Now go on, before I get sentimental. The ride to town was tense, every shadow potentially hiding Morrison's men. But the back trails were empty, the new snow muffling their horses' hooves. As they reached the edge of town, Caleb pulled up. Last chance to change your mind, he said. Never. Evelyn's jaw was set with determination. Whatever happens in there, I want you to know something. This week with you has been worth whatever comes next. Don't talk like that. We're going to get through this. I know, but I needed to say it. In case. They entered town from the east, keeping to side streets. The sheriff's office was just ahead when a figure stepped out of an alley, Dalton, his arm in a sling from the morning's fight, eyes widening in recognition. Well, he drawled, hand going to his gun. Morrison's gonna be real pleased. Caleb's rifle butt caught him in the temple before he could finish. Dalton crumpled, and they quickly dragged him into the alley. But the damage was done. Someone would find him soon. Move, Caleb urged, and they ran the last distance to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Thompson was a tall, gray-haired man with intelligent eyes. He looked up from his desk as they burst in, taking in their disheveled appearance and Caleb's rifle. Mr. Boone, he said calmly. Miss, I was hoping you'd come see me. Sheriff, we need protection. Caleb said. Morrison and his men are bounty hunters with seemingly legal papers. Thompson finished. Yes, I know. Question is, what's your side of this story? Evelyn stepped forward. My name is Evelyn Hart, Mr. Morrison claims I stole from his employer and attacked him. The truth is, his employer tried to force me into an arrangement I refused. When I defended myself and fled, they came after me. Thompson studied her carefully. You have proof of this? Only my word. But Sheriff, Morrison burned Mr. Boone's home, shot at us without warning. Does that sound like legitimate law enforcement? No, Thompson admitted. It doesn't, but without proof. The door burst open. Morrison stood there, flanked by 3 of his men. His scarred face twisted into a smile when he saw Evelyn. Sheriff, he said smoothly, I see you found our fugitive. We'll take her off your hands now. Not so fast, Thompson said, standing. This is my jurisdiction. Any arrests go through me. She's already under arrest. Morrison produced his papers. Legal warrant from Chicago. All I need is your cooperation. Thompson examined the papers while Caleb kept his rifle ready. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. These look legitimate. Thompson said slowly. But I have questions about your methods. Mr. Morrison, burning property, shooting at folks. That's not how we do things here. Man harboring a fugitive forfeits his rights. Morrison replied. His eyes never left Evelyn. Come along, girl, mister. Aldrich is waiting. No. Evelyn's voice was steady. I won't go with you. I want a trial, a real trial, with a judge and jury. Morrison's smile widened. You already had your trial when you ran? Guilty? That's not how it works. Thompson interjected. Not in my town. Miss Hart, I'm placing you in protective custody until we can sort this out. Mr. Morrison, you and your men will wait at your hotel until... Morrison drew his gun in one smooth motion. I'm done waiting. Sheriff, the girl comes with me. Now. Caleb's rifle was already rising, but Thompson raised a hand. Nobody moves. Morrison, you pull that trigger, you'll hang. Your papers won't save you from murdering a lawman. Who says I'm planning to murder anyone? Accidents happen. Man draws on bounty hunters serving legal papers. Morrison shrugged. Tragic. The standoff stretched taut. Then, from outside, came the sound of multiple horses. Many horses. Morrison's confidence flickered. The door opened again. and a man in a federal marshal's badge entered, followed by 4 deputies. He was young, but carried himself with authority. "Marshal James Porter," he announced. "I'm looking for a Jake Morrison, wanted for murder in Kansas, Missouri, and Colorado." Morrison's gun wavered. "That's a lie. I have papers. Forged papers." Porter interrupted. "We've been tracking you for months, using Aldrich's operation as cover for your own crimes. Did you really think you could keep killing witnesses forever?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Morrison blustered, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "Sarah Mackenzie in Kansas City." Porter listed calmly. "Testified against Aldrich's operation. Found dead 2 days later. Maria Santos in Denver. Same story. 3 more in Missouri. All women who tried to escape. All killed after you retrieved them." Evelyn gasped, and Caleb pulled her closer. They'd been right. She never would have made it back alive. Morrison's men were backing away now, seeing which way the wind blew. Morrison himself stood alone, gun still raised, but shaking. "Put it down," Porter ordered. "It's over." For a moment, it seemed Morrison might comply. Then his scarred face twisted with rage, and he swung his gun toward Evelyn. "If I can't have the bounty, no one—" 3 shots rang out simultaneously. Morrison staggered, looking down at the spreading red on his shirt. Caleb's rifle smoked, as did Porter's pistol and Thompson's shotgun. Morrison's gun fell from nerveless fingers. "Should have taken the money," he gasped, and collapsed. The room exploded into activity. Porter's men secured Morrison's companions while Thompson checked Morrison's body. Evelyn stood frozen until Caleb set down his rifle and pulled her into his arms. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe." "Is it? Am I?" She was shaking now, reaction setting in. Marshal Porter approached them. "Miss Hart, I'll need a statement, but I can tell you now, you're free. We have testimony from other women who escaped Aldrich's operation. He's been arrested in Chicago, along with most of his organization. You won't be hunted anymore." Evelyn sagged against Caleb, tears flowing freely. "Free," she whispered. Later, after statements were given and papers signed, they stood outside the sheriff's office in the late afternoon sun. The town seemed different somehow, less threatening, more like a place where lives could be lived. "What now?" Evelyn asked. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out something that caught the light. Mrs. Winter's gold ring. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "that we could find that Minister Morrison mentioned, make something official, if you're willing." Evelyn looked from the ring to his face, her eyes bright. "Caleb Boone, are you proposing to me in front of the sheriff's office? Seems as good a place as any. We've done everything else backwards. Might as well add this." She laughed through her tears, holding out her hand. "Yes, of course, yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and there in the muddy street, with deputies hauling bodies and townspeople staring, they kissed like they had all the time in the world, because now, finally, they did. Spring came early to Colorado that year. The snow melted into rushing streams, and wildflowers painted the meadows in brilliant splashes of color. In the small town of Cedar Falls, nestled in a valley where the mountains gave way to gentler hills, Caleb Boone stood outside his workshop, breathing in the morning air that smelled of pine and possibility. 6 months had passed since that desperate flight through the Wyoming snow. 6 months since violence gave way to peace, since running turned to building. The nightmares still came sometimes, for both of them, but they were fading, replaced by the rhythm of ordinary days. "Caleb, breakfast!" Evelyn's voice carried from their small house behind the shop. Not a cabin hidden in isolation, but a real home on the main street of town, with curtains she'd sewn and a garden she was coaxing to life. The workshop attached to it bore a simple sign: Boone's Metalwork, horseshoes, tools, repairs. He found her in the kitchen, flour dusting her cheeks as she pulled fresh bread from the oven. She still moved with that quiet efficiency, but the haunted look had left her eyes. In its place was something Caleb treasured more than gold contentment. "Smells good," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Everything smells good to you." She laughed, turning in his embrace. "Mrs. Patterson wants her kettle fixed today, and Tom Bradley needs new shoes for his draft horses. I'll get to them." He kissed her forehead, leaving a smudge of soot. "But first, breakfast with my wife." Wife, the word still felt new, precious. They'd married the day after Morrison died, in Sheriff Thompson's office with Mrs. Winters and Marshal Porter as witnesses. No fancy dress or flowers. Just two people choosing each other despite all the reasons they shouldn't. As they ate. Evelyn sorted through the mail that had come on yesterday's stage. "Letter from Mrs. Winters," she said, smiling. "She says the county finally agreed to repair the road past her place. Oh, and her mare had a foal. She's named it Hope. Fitting name." Caleb reached for the coffee pot. "Anything else?" Evelyn held up another envelope, her expression suddenly uncertain. "From Kansas City, addressed to you." Caleb recognized the handwriting. Jonah. They stared at the letter for a moment before he took it, breaking the seal with careful fingers. "Dear brother," he read aloud, "I hope this finds you well. Marshal Porter told me what happened, how you protected Miss Hart. I'm glad you found someone worth fighting for again. I know we parted badly, said things we shouldn't have. I blamed you for not saving them. But the truth is, I blamed myself for not being there at all. Mary was my sister-in-law. Sarah, my niece. I loved them too. And I ran from that pain just like you did. Only I ran to the bottle and the cards while you ran to the mountains. Neither worked, did it? I'm writing to say I'm sorry, and to tell you I'm getting married myself next month. Her name is Adelaide, and she's got 2 boys from her first marriage. Imagine me, a stepfather. Life takes strange turns. If you and your wife ever travel to Kansas City, you'd be welcome at our table. Your brother, Jonah." Evelyn reached across the table to take his hand. "Will you write back?" "Yeah," Caleb said roughly, folding the letter carefully. "I think I will." Later that morning, as he worked at his forge, Caleb thought about strange turns. A year ago, he'd been alone on his mountain, convinced his life was over. Now he had work that mattered, neighbors who nodded in greeting, a place in the world. And Evelyn. The bell above the shop door chimed, and she appeared with his noon meal. She often did this, bringing food and staying to talk while he worked. Today, though, she seemed nervous. "Something wrong?" he asked, setting aside his hammer. "No, not wrong." She fidgeted with her apron. "Caleb, do you ever think about what we lost? The families we might have had?" He set down his tools completely, giving her his full attention. "Sometimes, you thinking about your daughter?" "Every day." She moved to the window, watching the town's children play in the street. "But lately, I've been thinking about the future too, about second chances." Something in her tone made his heart skip. "Evelyn?" She turned back to him, a tremulous smile on her face. "Mrs. Patterson's not the only one who needed fixing. I saw Dr. Morrison yesterday. Caleb, I'm going to have a baby." The forge, the shop, the whole world seemed to stop. Caleb crossed to her in 2 strides, catching her hands. "You're sure?" "Very sure. Due in autumn, he thinks." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Are you happy? Happy?" He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "Evelyn, Words failed him. How could he explain that she'd just given him back the future he thought he'd lost forever? "I'm scared," she admitted against his chest. "After what happened before, after losing—" "Hey." He pulled back to look at her. "We'll face it together. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." That evening, they walked to the edge of town where a small cemetery lay peaceful in the shadow of the mountains. Caleb had placed a marker there months ago, not for a grave, but for a memory. Mary and Sarah Boone. It read, followed by dates and a simple inscription, Loved always. Evelyn laid wildflowers at the base of the stone, a ritual she'd started without his asking. She understood that loving Caleb meant honoring what came before. "I hope they'd be happy for us," she said softly. "They would be," Caleb said with certainty. "Mary always said I was too quick to give up on things. She'd be glad I finally learned better." They stood quietly for a moment, then turned back toward town. Their house was lit warmly against the gathering dusk, and Caleb could see neighbors gathering on the Bradleys' porch for their weekly singing. Normal things, living things. That night, as they lay in bed listening to coyotes call in the distance, Evelyn traced patterns on his chest. "Do you miss it? The mountain, the solitude." He caught her hand, kissing her fingertips. "No, that wasn't living, just existing. This," he gestured to encompass their room, "their life. This is what I was meant for. Just took me a while to remember. And if I hadn't knocked on your door that night, then I'd have died up there, maybe not in body, but in every way that mattered." He turned to face her fully. "You saved me, Evelyn. As sure as I saved you from Morrison, you saved me from myself." "We saved each other," she corrected. "That's what partners do." Outside, spring rain began to fall, gentle and nourishing. Inside, two people who'd found each other in the depths of winter held tight to the life they'd built. Tomorrow would bring work and worry, joy and sorrow in whatever measure life decided. But tonight, they had this, each other, their child growing between them, and the knowledge that some things broken can indeed be mended. Months later, as autumn painted the aspens gold, Caleb stood in that same bedroom holding his son. The baby was small but strong, with his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes. They'd named him William, after Mrs. Winter's husband, and Hope for his middle name. Evelyn watched from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "He's perfect," she whispered. "He is," Caleb agreed, marveling at the tiny fingers that gripped his own. "Our second chance." From the doorway, Mrs. Winters herself beamed. She'd come for the birth, bringing her practical wisdom in steady hands. "Life's funny," she said. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. You two are proof of that." As if in agreement, little William yawned and settled deeper into his father's arms. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, but inside their home, all was warmth and light. The storms had passed. The running was over. And in their place was something neither Caleb nor Evelyn had dared hope for: a future. "Thank you," Caleb whispered to his wife, to his son, to the world that had given him this gift. Evelyn reached out, and he settled beside her, their son between them. "For what?" "For knocking on my door that night, for not giving up, for teaching me that hearts can heal if you give them reason to." She smiled. That fierce, beautiful smile that had first caught him. "I told you that first morning. You weren't a tomb. You were just waiting to live again." And live they did, in that small Colorado town, raising their son and then his sisters who followed. They lived with purpose and joy, with ordinary days and extraordinary love. They lived as proof that sometimes the most unexpected visitors bring the greatest gifts. In the ending of their story, there was really just beginning, because that's what love does. It transforms endings into new chapters, winter into spring, two broken people into a family, whole and strong. The snow fell softly outside, but inside, the fire burned bright, and in that warmth, in that light, life continued. Beautiful, difficult, and absolutely worth every moment. Thank you all for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of love, redemption, and second chances in the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories that warm the heart. Share your thoughts about Caleb and Evelyn's journey. What touched you most? Until next time, partners.